As bold as lions. As bold as lions.
As bold as lions.
As bold as lions.
You're listening to the As Bold as Lions podcast.
Well, hello and welcome to the As Bold as Lions podcast. It is great to have you join me today, and just wanted to welcome you, whether you are a first-time listener or a returning listener. Hopefully, wherever you're at today, this week, this month, you're doing well and God is blessing you. My hope and prayer through each week as I do the podcast, and I always try to remember to pray before recording, hitting that record button, is just to say, God, use this for whatever your plans are. Whoever listens to it, whether it's one person or 100 people, just want it to be blessed and used by you. So hopefully that is what happens from week to week. I trust that it does, because God multiplies what we can bring and brings way more out of it than we could ever do on our own. So I am grateful for that. And we are in a series here as we go through the month of November. We are in a series titled My Favorite Verses. And this has been a lot of fun for me to dig into a few verses, passages of scripture that I certainly enjoy and just had either memorized growing up or have in the back of my mind, seem to recall and go back to. And today would be no different as we look at this passage from Matthew 6. This is Matthew 6, 25 through 27. It's a little lengthy, and the title of it is His Eyes on the Sparrow. Title of today's podcast, that is. And so it's a little lengthy, but I want to read it for you and just set this up as we move into today's message. It says, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life?" So as we look at this passage today, and the title as we threw that out there, His Eyes on the Sparrow, I have a favorite hymn, and really it comes from this passage, and that is that title, His Eyes on the Sparrow. And it just had kind of a special meaning for me over the years. You've probably heard it. But, back when I was first leaving home, and this is going well on 25 years now of graduating high school and going away to college, and it was the first kind of real time apart from family, to the point where, mom and dad aren't just right there, and you're in a different city, you're in a different state even, about 4.5 hours away from the place I grew up to where I went to school. And it was just a real transition point in my life. And I can remember when we went away to the first weekend to move into the dorms and to kind of just, have my parents there, bring all the stuff, move in. You say your goodbyes and then see you later for a while. But we went to church on that Sunday before school started. So my parents were still in town. We went to a church service, and I can remember, and this sticks out to me a lot of ways because my mom, it was also something just very poignant for her, but we ended or had in that service this song, His Eyes on the Sparrow. And it was just kind of this reminder at that point, like, as I leave the nest, God's still watching over me. and this big step in my life, going from high school and then 6 years of being in college and being away from family. Like, this was a big thing that I was embarking on. So that time, defined me as a man. It prepared me for the profession I was going to go into, and I did find my wife, future wife, during that time. So I had to look back on that and say, yeah, God, your eye definitely was upon me. And so, the song and then this passage, these verses have stayed with me as I've journeyed and have kept moving forward. And, I often just look back and meditate upon God's faithfulness and just look back and just say, yeah, Lord, you've been there every step, and you've never let me go through different things that I've experienced, single, married, having a family and kids, and all the things that just kind of go on. Just the reminders of his faithfulness, and to keep going, especially in those hard times, the dark times of life. And certainly we're in some days now, which it seems like there's a lot of heaviness and there's a lot of darkness, but just keep going back to his eyes on the sparrow. His eyes he's taking care of the big things and the small things. And actually, I think this reminds us especially that he's in the details of things, that if he cares about these birds, how much more does he care about you and about I? And so I want to dive in today, just kind of setting that up. And really, I'd done a series a couple months ago called Letters to the Hurting, and it kind of overlaps with that subject matter a little bit today. Just those who are worried, those who are full of anxiety or doubting, fearful, whatever. There's this truth in Matthew 6 in these verses here that I think we need to hear. And that's just, God doesn't give up on us. He doesn't abandon us. He's not going to forsake us, not going to walk away from us. And our needs are going to be met. I think that's a lot of times where our fear comes in. Is like, well, how am I going to get through this season? What this need that I have? It's this problem that I'm facing, and we have to just be reminded that God's in all that. He knows all that, and He's already going before us and planning something in the midst of that. So, I hope you're ready to dive in today. I know I am. And hopefully this is just an encouragement for you. As I've just kind of mentioned throughout these podcasts, especially this series, this is an opportunity to just kind of make this into a Bible study, a devotional, what have you. Something that'll just encourage you, whether you're driving into work or you're out taking a walk, or just wherever you're at, whenever you listen to these podcasts, let it just encourage you. So our first point today on Matthew 6:25 through 27 is that God is the provider of our needs. It says, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on." So, I think the fact that these are Jesus' own words, as I consider, that's powerful in itself. Think about Jesus coming into the world as we celebrate Christmas here relatively soon. He came into this world with nothing, and he had these quiet years of just kind of background. It almost seems like kind of just preparation and being hidden before he goes into ministry, and really, very humble, not having a lot that we know of. And then he starts his ministry, and it's just these 3 years, as far as we know, it's around that long. He travels around Judea, and he goes, without so much of a place to call his own. Like, he doesn't have a whole lot. He doesn't have a home. He doesn't have a lot of possessions, all that. And so he's just totally reliant and dependent upon the Lord to provide for his needs, for those basic things: food, clothing, shelter, all of that. And there's this passage in Luke where he says, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." That's Luke 9:58. So I think it's interesting that Jesus is like, I'm kind of this wandering individual that on this earth doesn't have this permanent place. And I think that's a reminder to us, like, earth is not our home either, that what we have is temporary and what we need will be met. Jesus had none of those things, but he still had all that he needed in order to do the ministry that he had before him. So, we can take away this truth, and I think we have to from this passage, is that God always provides. He always provides for what we need, and those basic necessities are always going to be there. They're going to kind of come up day after day. I need these. I've got to eat, so I've got to have food, and I've got to go get groceries, and I've got toilet paper and clothing and toothpaste and soap and gas in the car. And you just think about the list of, like, these are all the things I always am going to need. And it's just kind of recurring. And sometimes it's like, well, I've got all those things, and then I'd also like to have this, I'd like to have some new furniture. I'd like to have a new car. I'd like to have stuff for my kids, nicer clothes or whatever, all these things that then we kind of think we need as well. And it's like we step back from that and just try to pull away from some of that worry, just to say, yeah, whatever I have, it's going to be enough, because God's going to allow me to have what I need. And as I trust him, I think I depend less upon what I can do and what I can make happen, and just say, God, you're going to supply what is needed for today. And if we kind of have our bank account full and everything looks good, we can be more confident sometimes to step out and say, okay, yeah, God, I can do more for you, because now all these things are kind of in place and things are good. But what if it looks like, if we're just not always waiting for that, and we're just stepping out regardless of the bank account looks great, or everything is right where we want it? What if faith sometimes is that stepping even more into the unknown and even more into the uncertainty, saying, God, I know you're going to provide. Like, I don't see how this or that can be met through my own means, so I have to trust you. And sometimes that's really where our faith can come into play. I know in my own life, like, I can get hung up on what it's going to cost and what it's going to be in order to follow God more fully. And sometimes I can count that cost and say, no, it's too much. Like, I immediately just discredit God and say, by my actions, my choices, that I don't think he can do this, when really he can, but I'm just not allowing him to, because my faith is too small. So we have to look at of what we're going to give to the Lord, regardless of our circumstances. And if you think of the widow's mite, like, she gave out of everything that she had, and God, Jesus made note of that. He made special note to say she's giving everything she has, and that was really a situation that was blessed. So, as we look at his eyes on the sparrow, Matthew 6, God, first point, God is the provider of our needs. Secondly, God's provision is on display all around us. And Jesus takes special note to say, hey, look at this. He says, look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. And so Jesus is kind of appealing to nature here, and just it's an eye-opener for anybody that takes the time to consider it. He's like, look at these birds, these little sparrows, these little whatever we're assuming just some little, kind of basic boring bird that's just eating and flying around and things like that. And he's just saying, do they sit here and worry about whether they're going to have enough? Do they kind of make sure they store into barns and worried about reaping and sowing and all that? Like, he's saying, no, they just simply are provided with what's needed on a daily basis, and they survive because the Father feeds them. He's saying, like, God takes care of even these little birds. And so as we look at creation, we see the handiwork of the Lord. We see a creator who not only intricately weaves and forms, but he also develops also he weaves and forms and develops, but he also sustains and enables. So we see a creator who not only forms everything, but he also is in those things as well to continue to allow them to live and to breathe and to move. So this kind of dual nature of the Lord, that he's not this creator who just kind of winds it all up and then lets it go and says, good luck, like this kind of, like a deist kind of theology of, well, God just kind of created the world and then set it in motion. And now it's just like, it's on its own. Like, no, God created it. Yes. But he is in it as well. And he is, continually right there immediately, just in all things. And so he has those roles down perfectly, obviously. So Jesus, is elevating man just as God did by God created us on the sixth day. It's the culmination of the creation story. And he's saying, he's elevating man by saying, are you not of more value than they? He's saying, look at these birds. Are you not more valuable to the Father than these birds? And it's like, yeah, duh, And if God cares this much about a sparrow, a little bird, to take care of it, doesn't that say how much he cares about you? We are the crown jewel of creation. We are made in the image of God. And when we say, we look at nature and we see just the beauty of it and just how majestic, the mountains and the trees and the oceans and the rivers, and then just the animal kingdom and all these things, and the birds and bears and deer and rabbits and snakes and, all these things, like, even the animals you may not necessarily like, but God, he created all of it. And you just say all the things that he did, that is just an amazing, just shows an amazing, ability and love and just so much of the creation just reflecting this, like, God, you really are amazing. You really do love us. It should just bring us into this place of worship where we're just like responding with praise and adoration, and just reminding ourselves, like, yeah, God, when we look at nature, when we look at these things, it reminds me that you're going to take care of me. You're going to provide for me. So our final point today is that God calls us to lay down our worry. Kind of a response as we move through this passage. And a lot of times that's kind of where I like to end with a final point, is to say, what is the response then on us? It's to say that we have to lay down our worry. And he says here, and which of you by being anxious can add a single hour to his span of life? He's like, all the worrying that you do, all the fretting you do over something, who of you does that actually benefit and actually give you something in the end? It does nothing to help you. And Jesus addresses anxiousness a couple times in these verses. He says, do not be anxious. And then again, which of you by being anxious? Those kind of two phrases. And that stuck out to me as I consider this passage. He's saying worry must not be in our vocabulary as a follower of Christ. I know that's a bold statement, and it seems unrealistic in some ways, and to practice that, to actually walk that out. But follow me here, because I think this is important. Worry is always a killer to any sort of true faith relationship we can have in the Lord. Worry kills our faith and our walk and our trust in Jesus. And Jesus knew that worry was going to come up against the disciples. He saw Peter, and he knew Peter was going to deny him. And Peter's afraid. Like when Peter is going through the evening and the early morning hours, and Jesus on trial, and he's watching all this, and people are saying, "Aren't you one of his followers? Weren't you with him?" Peter gets afraid because he's seeing what's happening to Jesus, and he's, I'm sure, saying, "I don't want this to happen to me." So where does that lead them? It leads him to a denial of Jesus. And the rest of the group, the rest of the disciples, we know they all scattered. Once all this starts unfolding with Christ, they all scatter, they all run. And I think the same thing happens to us when we allow worry to get a foothold in our lives. We're mobilized, we're weakened, and really we're rendered unusable for the kingdom. Again, that's blunt, but I think worry takes us to a place where we can't be used to the full extent that we should be or could be for the Lord. I love these verses because it shows Christ is identifying with humanity. As we look at this passage from Matthew, he knows how strong the motivation can be when it's from a fear-based point of view, when it's just anxiety day after day after day, or you're waking up to what the world is putting in front of you. And it's just like that pressure. And Jesus identifies with that. He knows that that's there. Yet he calls us to look at the Father's nature and to shift our minds and our eyes upward and see him as a provider who he will not leave our need unmet. If we see God in that light, if we truly see him as that, worry does not have this hold on us. It can't, because our focus is not on the worry. It's on the one who will provide, the one who will take care of us. That's a great word, and I hope that's an encouragement for you guys, because as we go through this life, and as we've seen the last 18 to 24 months, I know I keep coming back to just the state of our world, but I think that's just kind of where everybody's at right now. We've got to see our provision and our just outlook on life is different because it comes from the Father. I've been doing this blog since 2017. I've been doing this podcast now since the beginning of this year. And the theme that I just continue to keep coming back to is that we're called in to walk in a place where doubt and worry must flee. And I speak these words of Jesus in Matthew 6. I speak them over myself first, because I know I can't change anyone but myself. I can talk to you about this and we can preach all day long, but I'm the one who has to take this and absorb it and say, I'm going to live differently because this is what Jesus is saying. These are his words. And my encouragement is that you would take that as well and say, I need to lay this down, this thing that I'm wrestling with, this worry, this fear. I know Jesus is going to provide. I know the Father is going to provide. And I'm not called to live in this state of anxiety. The rest of the world is there, but I'm called to live differently. And because I'm going to live differently, that's going to stand out and people are going to be drawn to that. And they will be. As we're on social media posting things that are different than what the world's posting, as we're having these interactions, as we're having conversations as Christians, and we have this hope and this joy despite all of this fearful stuff around us, that's going to stand out. People are going to be wondering, why are you not afraid? Why are you not shaken by what's going on? And we know there's going to be rough stuff coming because the Bible talks about it. The Bible is clear that there's just these birth pains and there's these end time things coming, and it all sounds pretty scary. But if you're in Christ, you're not focused on that. You're focused on him. And that's what the world needs to see as we walk through these days. We're not given any promise that we're going to be spared from hardship. I don't think the Bible ever makes any any promise that we'll somehow be spared from a difficult season or even the tribulation. We don't know. So to get through those things, to be unshaken, we have to keep putting our faith and our trust and our perspective has to be on the Father. So I just wanted to encourage you with that today, and I hope that these podcasts are blessing you in that way. As I finish up today's podcast, I kind of wanted to do something that's a little bit different. I have this song, His Eyes on the Sparrow, and I have it on a YouTube page. So I'm going to share that link. It'll be in the show notes if you can go back and find that. Also, you could just look up Derek Charles Johnson, His Eyes on the Sparrow, on YouTube search bar, and you'd find it. But for today and for the podcast, I just want to read through the lyrics because I think these are some pretty cool lyrics that as you sing hymns and you think about, especially this passage, it does tie in, and it's kind of it's just kind of a cool song because it's very simple. It's like His eyes on the sparrow, and so this is my response to that. I know He's watching over me. So go find that song if you can, but here are the lyrics to it, and I'll just read through these before I close with our final verse today. It says, "Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart be lonely and long for heaven and home? When Jesus is my portion, my constant friend is He. His eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches me." The second verse says, "Let not your heart be troubled. His tender words I hear, and resting on His goodness, I lose my doubts and fear. Though by the path He leadeth, still one step I may see. His eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches me." And the chorus or the refrain of this just says, "I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. His eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches me." And guys, when you think of this verse or this song, when you think of these verses, and just when you're drawn to creation, I find myself doing this more often when I just see a couple little birds. Like, say I'm coming into a parking lot, going into work or going into the store or whatever, and sometimes you just see these little birds gathered on the ground, just pecking away, finding their food, finding whatever they're looking for. And I'm just reminded, like, God takes care of them, so I know He's going to take care of me. And if He cares that much about these little birds that are just kind of nothing really to us, how much more does He care about us and just watches over us? His eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. Guys, I love you. And again, I always want to hear from you if there's something I can pray about for you, if there's some just thing you want to share in response to the podcast. I would love to hear that. Ephesians 5:15-17 is our closing verse, our theme verse for these podcasts. It says, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is." Guys, take care. God bless you. Hey guys, this is Derek Charles Johnson. You have been listening to the As Bold as Lions podcast. I am a blogger, a songwriter, an artist. And if you've been encouraged by this podcast, please go ahead and subscribe and share, and head over to derekcharlesjohnson.com for more encouraging content. God bless.